Happening now with several scandals dogging the White House. A column by the Wall Street Journal's James Taranto caught our eye. Here's an excerpt. He writes, "Liberal media bias is an old complaint, but the Obama presidency has given it a new and dangerous form. Never has the prevailing bias of the media been so closely aligned with the ideological aims and political interests of the party in power." End quote. Let's get some reaction from that from our Newswatch panel. Jim Pinkerton is a contributing editor and writer for the American Conservative magazine and a Fox News contributor. Alan Colmes, host of the Alan Colmes Show and author of Thank the Liberals for Saving America and Why You Should. A new and dangerous level, Jim?
Well, what Taranto said in that piece is, of course, what Kirsten Powers has been saying as well. Now, she's a Democrat who worked in the Clinton administration, and she said, listen, you know, there might have been media bias back then, but Bill Clinton certainly got clobbered a lot of the time by the liberal media. I can remember Chris Matthews would routinely attack Bill Clinton back in the 90s. And, of course, now her point is, and I agree, is that it's changed substantially and that the media are much more in lockstep with President Obama than any other Democratic president I can think of.
Somehow I suspect Alan sees it differently.
You must be psychic. I would say, to say that never before has the media been so aligned with the party in power is, to me, just patently absurd. You had a media that pushed the Iraq war when Bush was in power. You have a left wing that's very upset about Guantanamo still being open, about drone attacks, about civil liberties, and I don't see the marriage between the media and what the administration is doing on the left as much as Jim does, and Taranto, of course, who is a conservative writer.
Well, there are a bunch of left-leaning organizations that have been pushing the idea that the IRS deserved to go after the Tea Party and that the Tea Party deserved the kind of scrutiny it's been getting.
They deserve to go after any of these 501c4 organizations. And by the way, of 298 organizations they went after, only a handful, about 72 or so, were Tea Party groups. A number were progressive groups, not as many, and there were other groups that had no ideological affiliation. But they should go after all of these groups, and they granted them that 501c4 status when they didn't deserve it.
Alan, 72 is more than a handful. A handful
out of 298.
Well, that's a quarter. That's a big number. I mean, look, I don't think anybody, except perhaps you and maybe the people funded by the George Soros Media Consortium, think that the IRS was even-handed. It was anything other than even.
I don't think it was even-handed.
At all fair on this.
Let me be clear. I don't think that.
Mike Ciandella at Newsbusters did a terrific piece in which he counted up the members of this, quote, media consortium, which have gotten a total of $14 million from George Soros. And not surprisingly, you know, a deal's a deal. They're doing and saying everything that the Obama administration and the IRS and Soros himself would want them to do, which is to say that there's no scandal. The only scandal here, they're saying, is that the IRS wasn't tough enough
the right wing has been
Tea Party groups and so on.
So the right wing has been frothing at the mouth for a so-called scandal ever since Obama's been in office. And this idea that some kind of liberal consortium, now you want to tie George Soros to it. The Washington Post called the targeting of conservative groups appalling. I agree with that. The New York Times said there was a serious mistake made by focusing on groups with Tea Party in their name. This isn't a liberal consortium supporting what's going on. I think the Times and Post were exactly right to say this is appalling and seriously wrong.
But then
I agree with you. And so does Elijah Cummings, you know, the leading Democrat on the investigation committee. I mean, there's plenty of Democrats and plenty of liberals who are horrified by what the IRS does. The Ciandella point was people who are on the Soros payroll, oddly enough, are kind of happy with it.
Yeah. When you read down the list, the Center for American Progress, the Center for Public Integrity, the American Prospect, ProPublica, Mother Jones, all of these organizations got huge donations from George Soros, you know, totaling up to the millions of dollars.
Do you think George Soros dictated to them what they should say about this? I don't work for George Soros, by the way. I want to make full and open disclosure. But, you know, again, now we're trying to drag George Soros into this scandal.
Well, it is pretty interesting that all of those organizations suggested that the IRS has done nothing wrong.
All right, well, then show me that
groups.
Somehow they're taking direction from Soros in terms of editorializing on the IRS scandal. I mean,
well, they're getting paid by him. I mean,
all right, but show me those. the link between what they're saying here and getting paid. We don't have no evidence of that.
I mean, Soros is a far-left Democrat who likes Obama, so oddly enough, the people on his payroll are saying what he wants to. But listen, the more interesting issue here is, as Taranto points out in this piece, is that among the groups getting funded the Washington Post, which is not part of the Soros consortium, said, oh, they're a good government group. There's a group called Democracy 21. They're not a good government group. They're a left-wing advocacy group. But that's where the bias comes in. It bleeds over from Soros hirelings to the mainstream media in general, when the mainstream media say, listen, the Soros hirelings are just nice people.
Do you think these Tea Party groups that are clearly political in nature and are not quote-unquote public service organizations deserve this special tax-exempt status from the IRS? I don't think any of them do.
Alan, what about the president's, the president's half-brother opened that 501c4 organization, the Barack H. Obama Foundation. Does that deserve tax-free status?
I don't think any of them do. I mean, I'm not here defending giving them tax-free status. I'm saying, and I'm not defending targeting conservative groups. I think it is appalling, but let's be fair and balanced and point out that a small percentage of those groups were Tea Party groups, some of them were liberal groups, and there were many nonpartisan groups that were targeted as well.
Well,
Alan,
go ahead.
I mean, Alan, your math is way off here. The statistics on the bias, the orientation, including their own statements, where they remember, Alan, we're talking about something that the IRS has already admitted to. They admitted that they targeted Tea Party groups.
I agree.
I mean, they don't need you to deny it because it's too late. It's already been said.
I'm not denying it. I'm telling you. How many times do I have to say it was appalling? How many times? Do you want me to write it out for you in blood?
But you then say.
I'm pointing out that of 298 groups, 72 were Tea Party groups, 11 were 9/12 groups, 13 were Patriot groups, according to the Inspector General. That's all I'm pointing out, and that it wasn't a majority of Tea Party groups.
But if groups that have Tea Party in the name, or good government, or constitutional instruction, if that is the key word that they were looking for, that's pretty telling.
I agree with you. It's wrong. How many times? I agree with you.
All right.
You won't take yes for an answer.
I will take yes for an answer.
The point is that the issue is not what Alan thinks. The issue is how the mainstream media portray this, and the mainstream media continue to portray this as oftentimes as something legitimate. MSNBC, every show on MSNBC, except for Morning Joe, is saying that the IRS is the right thing. That's where the bias comes in.
You mentioned a bunch of not mainstream media websites. I mentioned the New York Times and Washington Post, who agree with us that this is totally wrong.
All right.
Except that the Washington Post then called Democracy 21 a good government group. That was
they called what the IRS did appalling.
We're going to have to